phenomenon, transmitting from the void.
Ahoy there, fellow emissaries and voyagers alike. Welcome aboard our venture into the void of endless oddities. This is the VEO Broadcast. Stand by. There's a place called Derry, a small and quiet sleepy town where the children go missing every 27 years. Even stranger, all the adults pretend that everything is fine. They just look the other way. Now, we all know that monsters aren't real, at least not like in the movies, but with everyone living under this willful negligence, it just makes you wonder, what kind of monster could grow in a place like that? In this story, we explore the lives of 7 children, each facing hardship and tragedy on their own, when suddenly an ancient evil begins to haunt them by taking the form of their worst nightmare. Only to their surprise, they learn that this creature has found a home in Derry and roams their neighborhood as Pennywise the dancing clown. These children, also known as the Lucky Seven, they band together and have to face their individual fears in order to defeat Pennywise, also known as It. So, the miniseries It premiered on the ABC channel back in 1990 as a 2-part show on TV. It never got a theatrical run, and so if you saw this movie as a kid, most likely it was at a sleepover or on your own if you were brave enough. But It from 1990 happens to be one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's one that still scares me to this day. And here's the thing though, this movie hardly has any blood. There's absolutely no gore, no violence. And this is something that I just noticed last night after rewatching it. So, besides the obvious, a killer clown that can morph into your worst nightmare, what makes this movie so scary? And it's worth noting that each of the Lucky Seven, phenomenal casting all around, they're all very interesting to watch, and you can't help but connect with each one of them, even if your childhood looked way different than theirs. And keep in mind that these kids, their stories are set in the 1950s, more so the late 1950s, but all their troubles and all their hardships, they all seem pretty timeless. And so whether you're in the most extreme of cases, if you experience a death in the family, bullying, any form of domestic abuse, each kid has a backstory and a weakness and also a strength that we can clearly understand. And again, depending on your upbringing, you can even empathize with. So there's something for everyone, and add the fact that Pennywise, when he haunts them, he does it in secrecy when no one else is around. So none of the adults believe them. So it's like the ultimate gaslight. And I think at its core, it's about facing a threat that no one else can see or worse yet, can understand. And it's practically this quiet battle that these kids are left to face on their own. So half the terror comes from desperately hoping, as the audience, that they find each other and they realize that they're not alone. And as adults, we know that humans can be absolute monsters if left to it. So the other half of the tension comes from the menacing bully named Henry Bowers, who is, again, an absolute menace in human form. And he's also looked over by the denizens of Derry. And so even though everyone's takeaway from this movie is Pennywise the dancing clown, I think it's more of an eye-level perspective of war between these 7 kids and this ancient evil, including the bully Henry Bowers. All the while, they process their deepest moments of solitude and alienation on their own. So there's a wonderful lesson in this story, despite all these things that I'm listing. But I think the lesson here is about finding and building a friendship that overcomes fear, as far as this version goes. And there's a lot that I want to talk about regarding the book and the 2017 remake. The book has a lot of great detail. The 2017 remake has the special effects, and it has a lot more nods to the book than anything else. So there's a lot of things I can just praise for both things. But me personally, I think the 1990 version, I think as a product, it takes the best of both worlds, both from the book and from what you could do in a form like what you can see on TV. And so all that to say is the book itself, if you haven't read it by now, it's about 1,000 pages. Again, good luck if you haven't read it. It's borderline nonsensical if you're not this avid reader. And it's overflowing with character detail again that juggles multiple storylines, goes back and forth, and it goes beyond the lives of the Lucky Seven. So, again, this book, the book itself, it's also a departure from how Stephen King wrote his other works at the time. Most of his books, Stephen King is a fast writer, and it's a case where each book takes him, I think, about a couple months to write, and the case with it is that it took him, I think, 4 or 5 years, I read somewhere, for him to write. So the concept alone is just incredible. You can do so much with it. And it shows because the book takes on so many ideas. Not all of them are really they don't really feel like finished ideas, but they're interesting. And there's a lot of couple things that aren't really great, to put it nicely. In fact, they're pretty messed up. I don't think I have to go into that because I think it's pretty well known what the most controversial parts of the book are. So again, the 1990 version, I think, takes the best of what you could do from all the ideas presented in the book. And so it's worth noting that, if you didn't know already, but Stephen King did do a lot of cocaine in the 80s, so maybe that has something to do with it. But going back to the movie, my first impression when I first saw this version from 1990, years and years ago, was watching the Losers Club, and when they finally banded together as the Lucky Seven, I just had this one thought, and it just made me wish that I had friends like that, you know? And to be clear, looking back, I've been very fortunate to find incredible individuals. Don't get me wrong, it's a case where, I've been able to find amazing just people that have been able to stand by me hand in hand while facing some pretty scary stuff. And even though we all face our fears on an individual level, through every singular experience, you never forget what it's like to stand with others when you do face a memorable event. And the beauty of this movie, I think, is just that. And I think we've all found ourselves at some point in need of help, or maybe just a push in the right direction. We all know what it feels like to belong, and we all know what it feels like to be left out. And when you feel like you belong somewhere with somebody or with some people, it feels pretty good. And when you belong to a group, and furthermore, you share a vision, a mission, there's nothing like it. And so I hope this movie brings back a couple memories for you. If you haven't seen it in a while, the good and the bad. Keep in mind that it may and probably will seem a little dated, but again, that's just part of the magic of watching this movie. If you didn't see it with people your age at that time, and there's just something about watching these kids. So if you didn't see it as a kid, watching people your age on screen, and you watched it with other people your age, again, it was just, you just had to be there for that moment. And so it brings me to my next point, that despite all the haunt and all the frights from Pennywise, I just can't help but realize that I don't think we'll ever get anything like this ever again, at least in this format, because it truly is this unique relic that was molded and crafted at just the right moment. It was too early for it to be ruined by subpar CGI, but it was made far enough in time when filmmakers on a tight budget, although limited to using practical effects and physical effects, these same effects, costumes, makeup, I'm talking, the real settings that they used, it was all done by people who loved their job and were left to create these incredible scenes that you can practically see, hear, and depending on the camera angle, some scenes in this movie you can almost feel, smell, even taste if you associate certain circumstances with rainy days. And so the director for this film was not the original hire. I do want to point that out. The script itself, for the first part of this version, was written by Lawrence Cohen, who before this wrote Carrie. So he left the project shortly before filmmaking began. And I'm mentioning all this because, that aside, relocations, budget cuts, issued by the studio at the last minute, surprise, surprise, And if you didn't know already, this is pretty common with any project or movie that gets greenlit in TV land, if it even gets that far. All that to say is that despite Pennywise already being a well written character for that time, again, Stephen King's book, it was released in 1986, just a couple years before this version. It was a bestseller, and Stephen King at the time was a household name. So the main challenge was adapting this colossal creature to fit within the network standards at the time. And that alone would prove to be a great challenge, seeing that the original source material, again from the book, contained just so many adult themes that would be too much for network TV. Again, remember this is ABC. It was a time where the idea was that older children and parents, grandparents, family would watch this when it came on. So, and at the time, Bob Iger was the studio exec at the time, and I think now he's currently the president of Disney. Last time I checked, so go figure. But all that to say is, what the filmmakers lacked in resources, they were able to make up for it in talent from, again, the crew and cast. And so all these factors designed to bring a movie down, it really just created the perfect storm that assembled the perfect monster for TV, something we hadn't seen before that time. And it wasn't a monster that can tear into buildings or one that hides in the shadows, but it's a monster that can walk in broad daylight right under our noses. It's a monster that can it pretty much grows every time we look the other way and we pretend everything is fine. It's a monster that not only knows your worst fear, but one that can understand your fear. It's a monster that can perfect your fear. It's a monster like Pennywise.